I would think of our animals out in pasture and sunshine and fresh air, and our goat herder, Judy Wicks, who said that when she kissed her goat's ears, it made the cheese better. I think that's true. So to me, business is about relationships. Relationships with everyone that we buy from and sell to and work with, and about our relationship with Earth and all the other species who live here with us. Business is about relationships. Money is really simply just a tool. My business was the way that I expressed my love of life, and that's what made it a thing of beauty. I thought I would just read a little from the preface of the book, just to give an overview of my work. This book is both a love story and a business book. It's about a love of life, nature, animals, community, and unique local culture. A love of good food and family farms, and a love of democracy, all being threatened by a global economic system driven by profit. It's also about a deep love of business, and how we can embrace a way of doing business that is beautiful, that nurtures all that we cherish, and that furthers the creation of a whole new economic system based on caring relationships. Though this new economy is global in vision, my story, and the story for each of us, begins right at home, in our own community, and with our own capacity to recognize and protect what we truly care about. So this was my home and business on the 3400 block of Sanson Street in Philadelphia. And I believe that the first step in building a local economy is to choose your place in the world and take responsibility for that place and become knowledgeable of that place. Where does food come from? Where does water come from? Where does garbage go? And so I lived in this house for almost 40 years, just recently moved, and grew it from a muffin and coffee takeout shop to a $5 million 200-seat restaurant. And I believe that the reason for our success was, in fact, being really committed to place and committed to our community. So here are my kids, Grace and Lawrence, who were 2 and 4 when I started the White Dog, and I put this slide in of them because I want to make the point of living and working in the same community. We lived above the shop, in like the old-fashioned way, like the family farm, or the family inn, or the corner store. So there was a real integration of work life and family life, which is lacking in today's very separated world. And one of the things that tends to get separated in contemporary times are values. That at home we teach our children the golden rule. But when we get to work, gold rules. He who has the gold makes the rules. And we know what kind of economy and a country that has built, one where there is growing inequality and really control over our government by big money. So I believe that when we live and work in the same community, there's a short distance between the business decision maker and those affected by those decisions. So we're more likely to make decisions for the common good. And I'll give you an example of this. The person on the right is Greg Coleman, who is a long-term dishwasher at the White Dog. This particular picture was taken in Havana, Cuba, on one of our international sister restaurant trips, where Greg decided he would go into the kitchen and help their dishwasher wash dishes. And after I saw this picture, I realized it was because she's a pretty cute dishwasher. But I have Greg's picture here because I wanted to make a point about a living return, paying a living return. That when I first heard about this, I had a knee-jerk reaction. Oh, well, no one's going to tell me how much to pay my people. I can't afford to pay a living wage that was at the time $8 an hour. I'm sure it's much higher now. I didn't pay just minimum wage, but not $8 an hour for an entry-level dishwasher. But I was in the kitchen one day, and Greg and a couple other dishwashers people looked up at me at the same time, and the light bulb just went off in my head. And I thought, what am I thinking? Of course I want anyone that works full-time at the White Dog to be able to pay their rent and buy their clothes and so on. So we instituted the living wage at the White Dog. Another example is my relationship with my natural world, with nature. I had heard about climate change, and in fact we started having educational programs about climate change at the White Dog in 1998. And I knew that Pennsylvania was deregulated as California was, so that we could actually buy renewable energy. But I wasn't motivated to make a change until there was a drought in Pennsylvania. And when I went up to the woods to hike, I saw that all the leaves were starting to fall off the tops of the trees, even though it was August. And the water was all dried up in the creek. And as I walked along, it was just an eerie silence. Not even the birds were singing, just the crackling of the sticks and leaves. And I just all of a sudden caught it. I just felt it in my heart that this was what climate change was like, that parts of the world were going to have droughts and fires, and other parts storms and floods, and of course we've known that over the last 15 years, this was back around 1999, that has come to be. So I just went over to a big tree and became a tree hugger, put my arms around it, pressed my face against the bark, and promised that I would go back to Philadelphia. And the White Dog became the first business to buy 100% of our electricity from renewable sources. But that came about not because I made the intellectual decision that it was the right thing to do, but rather because I really cared about nature and cared about the woods. So here's Judy Dornstrike, the one that picks the rose radium in her garden, and her husband Mark Dornstrike that have Ranch Creek Farm, a big supplier over the years of the White Dog Cafe. And Mark once told me that successful farming is the balance between masculine energy and feminine energy, between efficiency and nurturing. If you have too much efficiency and not enough nurturing, you'll have a well-run farm, you're using your time wisely, but you'll have poor tomatoes. On the other hand, if you have too much nurturing and not enough efficiency, you might have great tomatoes, but you got to go out of business because you don't use your time wisely. And so I saw that this was really reflected in the whole economy, especially in agriculture and industrial agriculture. Probably one of the worst examples of this imbalance of the masculine and the feminine is in factory farming of animals through the battery cages of the hens. And the whole name of the game is, how little space can you give that hen? How little food and water? How little light and air? All to get the cheapest egg possible. No nurturing in this system. So of course at the White Dog we used to pasture chicken and eggs from pastured hens. Then I found out about the factory farming of pigs, and I was just astonished when I read about this in John Robbins' book, The Diet for a New America, to find that these mother sows are kept in these cages where they can't even take a step forward or backward or turn around their entire life. Never feel sunshine, never have a breath of fresh air. These are sentient beings, these are mammals, like our dogs, like us, and all of we mammals share the capacity for feelings, from everything from joy to despair. So I felt that this was a violation of nature to treat these mothers in this way, and really a betrayal of our trust and to be the stewards of farm animals. So I finally went into the kitchen and said, we've got to take pork off the menu, because I realized that our pork, like pork everywhere, unless you know otherwise, comes from this system. And I did not want to be a part of this whole system, so I said, we've got to take all the pork off the menu, the bacon, the pork chops, the ham, until we can find a sustainable source. So we did. This is out in Lancaster County, and this is the way the pigs like to sleep. And pig pals are very social creatures in the mud and the sunshine. So then I learned about the plight of the cow, how cows are herbivores. They're supposed to be eating grass and clover and all those things, but of course they're taken out into stockyards, and the dairy cow oftentimes never even go outside. So we switched to, this is Buck Run Farm. Bill Elkins with his herd of Angus, and all of our meat, including hamburger, all came from local grass-fed beef. With dairy, we were just, at the time that I sold the restaurant, trying to find farms that left the cows with a mother. This is Hawthorne Valley Farm, a dairy farm in Hudson Valley that leaves cows with mothers for 9 or 10 months. But this is rare. When I find out that the babies are taken away usually at birth so that people can drink the baby's milk, I mean, to me that is sick. So I don't even drink milk. So here we are. Here's Dougie, the one that kissed her goat's ears. And I got to the point where I looked at my menu and thought, gee, we've done it. All of our meat and poultry and animal products come from small farms where the animals are treated with respect and lots of nurturing. This is going to be our market niche. This is our competitive advantage. This is all about us. And then I thought to myself, well, Judy, if you really do care about those pigs, if you really care about the streams that are being polluted by the concentration of manure, sometimes 10,000 pigs in one barn, they're killing all the fish out in rural areas and ruining the swimming holes and poisoning the wells. If you care about the small farmers being driven out by these large corporate farmers, and if you care about the consumers that are eating meat that's full of antibiotics and hormones, then rather than keeping this as your market niche, as your competitive advantage, you'll share this information with your competitors. And that was a transformational moment for me when I moved from competition to cooperation and realized that there is no such thing as one sustainable business. we can only be part of a sustainable system, and that we need to work together by cooperating to build sustainable food systems that share all these values. So I asked the farmer, Glenn Brendel, here we are at the Dance of the Ripe Tomatoes, but I asked Glenn, who was bringing us in 2 pigs a week, if he would like to expand his business. And he said yes, and I said, what's holding you back? He said he needed $30,000 to buy a refrigerated truck so that he could deliver to other restaurants in town. So I loaned him the $30,000 so he could increase the supply of pasture pork to Philadelphia. Then I started Fair Food, a nonprofit, started putting 20% of my profits into my nonprofit, and the first task of Fair Food was to make a list of all the farms that the White Dog bought from, with the contact information, what products are sold, and go around and give it to all the other restaurants in town. And Fair Food is now 14 years old and has started a Fair Food farm stand in our public market, the Reading Terminal Market in Philadelphia. We represent 100 different growers and processors, local processors, with processed foods such as ice cream and yogurt and energy bars and bread, and we have our own crackers now in Philadelphia, so we can have local cheese on our local crackers, and we're very proud that we have our own gin now, really great gin, Blue gin, and so on. So Fair Food has really been able to make a big difference, like connecting really hundreds and hundreds of farmers and local restaurants and stores in Philadelphia. And then worked in cooperation with several other organizations to create the Common Market, which is our food distribution system company. So the Common Market driver goes around to the other farms in the area and picks up their goods, brings it into town to be aggregated in a central hub. So that large orders can be taken from hospitals and schools. And this sort of began with the Fair Foods Farm to Institution program, where we're trying to identify larger farms to be able to supply the institutions. But the larger institutions and even some of the larger restaurants and hotels did not want to be calling 20 farmers a day. They wanted to pick up the phone, just like they call Cisco, and call one central number to have everything delivered. So another thing for me in the business world that gives me the creeps is this mantra of grow or die, that we have to continually grow bigger and bigger and bigger and sell to some multinational in order to be successful. So, people would say, well, how many restaurants do you have? Well, just one, For a while I thought maybe I was a big sissy because I wasn't following up on offers to start a White Dog in New York City or DC or whatever, but I realized that if I were to start a national chain, that I would lose what was most important to me, which is the authenticity of the relationships I have with everybody that I work with. So instead of starting a White Dog Cafe in someone else's community, I started a Black Hat in my own community, which is a retail store next door to the White Dog Cafe that we specialize in selling locally made ceramics and glassware and candles and all kinds of cool stuff. So I started to see that chain stores are like invasive species. They go into other people's communities and smother out the indigenous businesses in those communities. So then I thought, okay, well then how does nature grow in a healthy way? Well, nature grows deeper in place. Nature grows to become more diverse, more complex, and more adaptive to the needs of that particular ecosystem. And that's how we as businesses can also grow in our places to continually evolve. Then I also saw, that's supposed to say reimagining, not re-imaging, but I started to see that we could reimagine growth, that we didn't even have to grow in a physical way. We could grow by increasing our knowledge, expanding our consciousness, deepening our relationships, developing our creativity, building community, and having more fun. So here's some of the ways that we did that at the White Dog to increase knowledge, expand consciousness, and so on. We had table talks at dinner on issues of public concern. So our community had places to discuss these issues. Here's Patch Adams, the humorous doctor, at one of our breakfast talks. We did storytellings to give voice to underrepresented voices, like Tales from Jails of Ex-Offenders. Here's a storytelling on same-sex marriage with a lesbian couple and a gay couple. We did community tours. Here's a tour of inner city gardens, a tour of the organic growers of Greaterford at a state penitentiary. We saw how the prisoners felt that growing organic food was healing them. We did annual events. This is the Martin Luther King annual event. We did a Freedom Seder every spring. We did Native American Thanksgiving dinner. We did a Happy Birthday Gandhi, you know, all these different great events. And in the summertime, we had block parties out in the street just to have fun, to build a community. And this is one of my favorite ones. We had No Tea Latina, Rum and Reggae, Bastille Day, and so on. This is the Liberty and Justice for All Ball on the eve of 4th of July. And I put on this little skit called Birth of a Nation. I'll show you this real quickly. After we have a big buffet of locally grown cooked foods for our guests of maybe 200 people, we put on a little skit. First would come out the Revolutionary War fellow playing his drum. Next I would be led out by my midwife as a pregnant colonial lady. On my back I had this sign, George Washington slept here. I was helped into my bed by my midwife, who then said to the audience, 1, 2, 3, and everyone yelled push. And under the covers I pushed my beach ball through this hidden hole. And my midwife delivered my twins who were hiding underneath. Here comes the first one. Here comes the second one. One is Liberty, the other is Justice. They hop on the stage and do a tap dance, a Yankee Doodle Dandy. And we wheel out the Statue of Liberty and light our sparklers and sing God Bless America. So this is a way that I feel that we should be having fun in our communities. I hope we have some festivals like this here in Colorado Springs. Sometimes we think that we have to spend a lot of carbons and a lot of dollars to fly to Hawaii or someplace to have a good time. But we can actually have more fun in our own communities and build lasting relationships with our neighbors and our family and so on in this way. So that's how I was able to reimagine growth in a way that worked for me, worked for the environment, and worked for my community. So one of our most adventuresome projects was our International Sister Restaurant project, where I had this dream of walking into a restaurant instead of ordering a table for 2 or a table for 4. I said, I'll take a table for 5,000, please, imagining a world where everyone had a place at the table economically and politically, and everyone had enough to eat. Of course, we had to change the name to Six Billion soon thereafter. So we would take delegations of our customers and our staff to different countries that the U.S. government has some problems with, and look to see how our foreign policies affected the lives of others, usually looking first at the farms and markets and food distribution systems. This is in Vietnam, in Saigon. Another sister restaurant relationship in Cuba, El Bamboo. There's Greg, the dishwasher in the front, and someone from our office. We bring a collection of employees and staff. Here's the beautiful gardens of, people know of the famous community gardens of Havana, where so much of the vacant land is turned into these thriving local gardens that feed the local population, and they're kind of rush against starvation, really, when the Soviet Union pulled out. So here's one of our farmers, Mark, who went with us, talking to a Cuban farmer about composting. These two guys had been in the military and were trained as farmers, and they had a medicinal herb farm. And that's such a great thing to, you know, swords and plowshares concept. And that's actually happening in this country too. And right here in Colorado, veterans to farmers are training vets to become farmers when we need them. So one of the most educational stops for me in our International Sister Restaurant project was Chiapas, Mexico. And I had a real curiosity about why did the Zapatistas have their revolution on the day that NAFTA went into effect, January 1st, 1994. So I found out in going down there that the reason was because they predicted that when NAFTA went into effect and lowered the borders between Mexico and the United States, that U.S. corporate corn growers, subsidized with our tax dollars through the Farm Bill, would dump cheap corn into Mexico and put out of business the local indigenous farmers. And of course, that's exactly what did happen. So the Zapatistas were saying no to this. They wanted to maintain local self-reliance. And it was the first time I ever heard about that or ever thought about that. And this was back in 1995. And they wanted to maintain their own culture. They didn't want to be sucked into the monoculture of corporate globalization. They wanted to be able to teach their kids in their own language with their own values. They wanted to wear the same clothes that the women had been weaving for thousands of years, instead of being forced to, off the farms and into the maquiladoras to make cheap clothes for export to the United States and Europe. So in the beginning, I thought I was coming down here to help the Zapatistas, and I did do a coffee project and a honey project and so on. But I began to see that there was a relationship between the farmers of Chiapas and the farmers of Pennsylvania. That in both situations, the farmers were losing ground to the big corporations, to policies that were in the United States that were also forcing our farmers off the land, and that we were losing our local self-reliance in Pennsylvania, just as the Zapatistas were fighting not to have happen down in Chiapas, and that all over the world, as I travel on our sister restaurant project, I saw the same thing happening, that we were losing the local economies, we were losing local self-reliance. So I began to see that the global economy did not have to be controlled by these big multinational companies of commodity crops, you know, sending food and clothing and energy all over the world. That rather than that, that the global economy could be a network of sustainable local economies, where the local economies produce basic needs at home: food, shelter, clothing, energy. And that we then traded globally for what was not available locally, for what we had access of, and what we have that's unique to our region: a special wine, a special fashion, an innovation of an entrepreneur. That these are the things that we should be trading globally in this intricate network of small to small around the world. So with that vision in mind, I co-founded Bali in 2001. Basically, we do three things: of connecting the leaders, because oftentimes the leaders, I'm sure this happens to you here in Colorado Springs, the leaders in this movement are isolated from the leaders in other places of the country. So we connect the leaders through a fellowship program and through our annual conference, which is in Phoenix, Arizona in June next year. The website, by the way, is bealocalist.org, in case you want to know more about Bali. We spread solutions about building local economies, and we drive investment from the stock market to local economies. So here's a picture of our local Sustainable Business Network retreat in Philadelphia. There's so many different ways that we can collaborate when we come together. Some of the members of our local Sustainable Business Network coffee shops all got together so that they could buy in bulk to help compete with the Starbucks and so on. And they even came up with the idea of printing coffee cups. It's so expensive to print them with one logo on it, but if you print them with 6 or 8 logos on it for all the different small coffee shops, you can afford to do that. Many other examples of this, you know, composting programs, using old fry oil from the restaurants to heat the houses and the greenhouses of the farmers out in the countryside and so on. But I like this slide because it shows that there is real collective joy in working toward a shared vision for our economy. It's just really lots of fun. So the main community that we all belong to, the ultimate community, is the vibrant community of life on Earth. And of course, our industrial economy, with so little connection to place and so much about efficiency and so little nurturing, is really greatly diminishing the vibrancy of the web of life that supports all of us. And so there's real urgency in our work ahead, really a race against time to stop climate change and environmental decline before this vibrant community is lost forever. And also an urgency to prepare our communities for the effects of climate change, to become more self-reliant in basic needs. So when we understand that all life is interconnected, spiritually and economically, we can feel our own connection to the suffering pigs. We can feel our connection to the struggling farmers. We can feel our connection to the polluted rivers and the dying fish. I didn't make the decision to share with my competitors because I figured out in my head that this is the right thing to do. I made that decision because I love the pigs. It gave me the passion. Jill mentioned that earlier. That's where it all starts. It starts with the passion to protect what we love, and go from there. So all that began, my love of the pigs, for me, ended up in my work to build a local economy in Philadelphia, and my work through Bali on a national basis. So it all begins with leading with love. Strategies and tactics are really secondary of importance, that the transformation of this economy from one that is life-taking to one that is life-giving really begins in the heart of the entrepreneur and the heart of the investor and the heart of the consumer. Michael doesn't like that word, so I'll say the heart of the eaters. That when we love our places and take responsibility for them, when we open our hearts and lead with love, we build vibrant communities and ecosystems and just and sustainable economies. And if we are to succeed in leaving a positive future for our children and for the children of all species, it will be because mankind has evolved to take our place in the vibrant community of life, not as exploiters, but as lovers. Thank you.